Hello and good evening to all. This is Latin Libertarians. My name is Martha Bueno, and I am coming to you live from Miami with my co-host, Mr. Zach Foster in Los Angeles, California. Good evening, Zach. How are you tonight?
What's shaking, Martha?
Here. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a minute to talk about the condo collapse that happened here in Surfside, Florida. And I wanted to take this opportunity to just thank the men and women who are working really hard through all sorts of weather. We've had a tropical storm and tropical storm conditions, and they have been working around the clock. Unfortunately, at this moment, they have moved from search and rescue to search and recovery. And so it is a very tragic event, and it is affecting us all. And I wanted to say thank you again to the brave men and women who are working around the clock on this issue. And so with that, tonight's episode, we are going to be talking about that tropical storm. We're going to be talking about all things Cuba that did go through that tropical storm Elsa, or hurricane, I'm not sure on Cuba there. And we will be bringing on our guest, Marilyn Salabarria from Cuba, to discuss all things Cuba. I think that it's a subject that's really important. A lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about Cuba and what goes on over there, and especially what's happening right now with the aftermath of this hurricane tropical storm and the recovery, what it takes in Cuba to get better. So, hi, Zach.
Well, we got some news from our Cuban Libertarian brothers living down in Havana. This is specifically coming out of the neighborhood Arroyo Naranjo. For starters, let's go ahead and give some people a visual just so they can see the folks that we're talking about. Do we have a fairly recent photo of the Cuban LP? Oh, there they are, doing the opositor sign. That's beautiful. So this is the Cuban LP in Havana. These are the folks in Arroyo Naranjo. The hurricane happened in Cuba, and there was predictably a lot of damage, water damage, wind damage. However, because of the extremely poor infrastructure, because of the strong rains, and because of the lack of, well, ironically, the lack of planning within a system of central planning, the power went out, infrastructure got flooded. There was a little bit of an electrical fire, a local transformer blew up, and people in Arroyo Naranjo and the surrounding area spent several days totally without electricity and without running water, and people were having to make wood fires to be able to cook because the power wasn't running. So obviously the government left a whole lot of people to fend for themselves, and this is something that happens every time that there's a tropical storm on the island, every time that there's any kind of other natural disaster or a man-made disaster. Basically, people are totally SOL and they have to fend for themselves, which is a shame. I'm not doing this for the sake of bashing communism. I am doing this for the sake of telling everybody, telling the world what our Cuban libertarian brothers and sisters actually go through on the day-to-day living through this system. And ironically, there's a lot of folks who live in our country, which is relatively free compared to Cuba. And they think that what our libertarian brothers and sisters are living through down there, they think that's the model for what we ought to be doing over here. And of course, I cannot help but think of how absurd that is.
I can't agree more. And, just the hurricane or the tropical storm is not exactly the only reason why they don't have power. As a matter of fact, most places in Cuba have very limited amounts of power during the day, and they usually cook with kerosene anyways. So this is kind of the usual, but I do want to bring on Marilyn Salabarria because she lived in Cuba for a really long time, and now she's here in the US. And I think as Cubans, we hear a lot. Sorry, Zach, tonight you are overwhelmed. The Cubans are going to take over. For those that don't know, Zach is of Mexican descent and I am Cuban, and our guest, as I said, is Cuban. So tonight the Cuban ladies are taking over the show. Sorry again, Zach.
Well, that's all right, because if y'all are Cuba and I'm Mexico, then I'll be seeing you guys in my territory pretty soon.
So let's give a great welcome to Marilyn. I see a comment here before we get started. Yes, those were Cuban libertarians living in Cuba. And actually, Zach and I talk about them often. For the time being, they are all out of Cuba, out of Cuban jails, but they generally spend some time going in Cuban jails because of the books and because of the thoughts that they have, books that they have in their presence, in their homes, etc. So yeah, no, those are the Cubans that are literally doing what we talk about and are fighting for what we have here in the U.S. pretty much. So hello, Marilyn. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to put your Twitter handle up because a lot of people might recognize you from Twitter. I know that I certainly do, and I retweet you quite a bit.
Well, thank you so much, you guys, for having me on the show. It's really very humbling experience, and I really appreciate the invitation.
Oh, I love having you here. And just give us a little bit of your background so people know who you are, where you came from.
Well, I am obviously came from Cuba. I was born and raised under Castro. I left Cuba in 2001 at age 27. So there is really not many things about living in a communist, centrally controlled and planned society that anybody can come and tell me, because I was literally born and raised under it. I have been here in the States again for almost 20 years now. Did my mandatory time in Miami for 4 years and a half. And then after I graduated from FIU, I relocated in Colorado, and then Colorado has been home since then. My kids were born here. I am currently a small business owner. So my business, was created here. When I was able to get my mom and my dad out of Cuba, they flew directly to Denver, Colorado as well. So the Rocky Mountains is home now for me.
That is awesome. I'm still in Miami, so it's not an obligatory thing. Some of us actually like it here.
Well, I like to go back. But after 2 weeks, after I have visited all the cousins and the aunts, and I have done all the restaurants and all that, I'm kind of ready to come back to my little stinky town in northern Colorado.
To each their own. I love the Miami feel. I love the Hispanic feel of Miami. Again, sorry, Zach, out in LA.
Well, I have very good Cuban friends in LA too. So that's kind of just to Zach's credit there.
We're everywhere.
Exactly. So anyway, that's kind of the wrap up of basically who I am. I usually tell people I'm just a simple Cuban girl born in Cuba, made in the US, trying to make a living here, a better future for myself and my kids. Getting a little tricky lately on that goal as we see how things are going around us here in the States. I left Cuba at age 27 in 2001, right after I graduated from law school in Havana University. I did a master's in journalism and mass communication at FIU in Miami. And then it was right after that I got a job offer here in Greeley, Colorado. And that's how I ended up here. Granted, back then we didn't have smartphones. I have no idea where Colorado or Greeley, let alone, was located, but I was ready for the adventure. And then I did that for almost 4 years. After that, I also worked as a medical interpreter and translator. Did that for almost 10 years until I decided to start my own business when the kids were born. And lo and behold, what I do now for a living with the company has absolutely nothing to do with what I went to school for.
Talking about what you went to school for. So you studied something in Cuba that I think is so interesting because there are very few lawyers in Cuba. You can't sue people in Cuba. The thought of what Americans think of for lawyers doesn't happen in Cuba, but you studied law. You're a lawyer or got a degree in law in Cuba. So tell us about that.
Well, that was kind of literally the cherry on the top of any awakening moment that any person can have when you are, again, born and raised in a totalitarian society. It was actually when I started in law school that I started studying law and the history of law and all that a lot of things were starting to click in the back of my head. And around those years, a lot of things happened in Cuba when I was still there. When I was going to the university, it was like the Elian crisis. It was when the Cuban government sank the 13 de Marzo tugboat. It
Let's
was
talk about that,
the
please.
years of the Maleconazo. It was the years of the rafter crisis, when the Clinton administration was in the White House. So a lot of things happened. Granted, in Havana, and I was right there. Many of them I was able to see them, like, you know, from the distance, but kind of like a scary close distance, if you say. So they kind of like added steps into that awakening, eye-opening process that I believe everybody sooner or later goes to in Cuba, to the point that, as we have, you know, discussed with you, Martha, before, that it was like almost at the end of my years in law school in Cuba, it was actually my mom, the one that told me. She knew that my inclination was to do criminal law, that's kind of like the part that I would like the most. And she was the one that, you know, hearing me speaking, hearing me discussing, and kind of like literally like venting at home with like the idiocy. Okay, this they're teaching me this stuff in school, and this is not what is happening in real life. This doesn't make any sense. This who do they think they're going to be fooling? At some point, it really reached a moment where it was my mom, the one that told me, okay, you need to duct tape your mouth. You need to graduate from law school. You need to finish the university, because, you know, whatever your study, your title, whatever you learn, nobody can ever take that away from you, regardless of where you are. And she added, but you need to get the hell out of here. Because she said, because if you don't, you are going to end up in jail with whoever is the person that you are representing. And that, coming from a mother of, I'm a single child of my mom and my dad. For me, that was kind of like literally like a, you know, hard-hitting reality check moment in my life.
I can imagine. I want to go very quickly to what you talked about, the boat of el 13 de Marzo.
Mm-hmm.
Because I, being Cuban and born and raised here in the United States, I had briefly heard about it before you spoke about it, that time that we spoke. And I couldn't believe that this is something that wasn't more widely known. And so what happened was there was a tugboat.
So number one is that there is a book. There is a book, and it's written in Spanish, because I remember I got it. I believe it was from a public library in Miami, and I got it on a loan delivery, something like that. Here in Colorado, I read it and I sent it back. And also the Cuban Archive Project has an excellent data recollection of links, stories, pictures, testimonies of everything that happened. I am terrible with dates, so I can't remember exactly the year, but basically what happened is that a group of Cubans, many families with many children, so a lot of the big group, they were somehow all related. They stole an old tugboat from the Havana harbor, right there in La Lanchita de Regla, like where the Regla piers is. I think that's the name. I can't remember now. It's just like the names in Spanish are popping out in my head. And then their goal was to, you know, make the journey to Key West or to Florida. They were rat out by somebody or discovered by the Cuban Coast Guard. This lady's testimony, this one that you're putting on the screen now, is awful. Yeah. Her baby was 9 months old or something like that. Yeah. And it was the Cuban Coast Guard, under the express authorization of Raúl Castro Ruz, the one who murdered those people. 27 of the victims in that murder were children under the age of 7. So basically, all that happens like right there at the entrance of the Havana harbor in Miami. I mean, you can see the whole show from El Malecón that day. See, that's right there what they're showing in the video. So, and then there was that Greek vessel that also took videos and kind of like reported and gave testimony of what happened. Basically, like even before they left the visual eyesight of what you can see from the El Morro or La Cabaña, which is the restaurant where I used to work, and that's how I learned about it. Raul Castro gave the order to the Cuban Coast Guard to use like their water hoses, like the hoses, like where they're doing when a vessel is on fire, to sink and to capsize the tugboat. And then on top of that, they waited. I don't know what was there is like an international rule for how fast you have to rescue people that are literally floating on the water. And I think that they went over that time. So long story short, it was a government order, condoned and supported murder of Cubans. And their only crime was that they were trying to leave the island prison. They were trying to leave the plantation, the same place where I was born and I grew up with. And then many of them after that, obviously the ones that were rescued in Cuba, they were immediately labeled as counter-revolutionaries. They were imprisoned, they were interrogated, you name it. As years passed, they made it to the United States. Some of them did the straight trip here. Some of them did it through, another country. And that's when the testimonies and the stories started to get recollected. And it's this book that I was mentioning before. I don't know if they have an English edition to it, but I know for sure there is one in Spanish because that's the one I read. And it's just like beyond heartbreaking. And then to add insult to injury, when you were in places like I was in that restaurant that I used to work in La Cabaña, then you have like for the next 3 or 4 days after that, the state security forces coming into all those places that were literally located on places where people were actually witnesses of what happened. And they will have like this centrally planned meetings where they would tell us what you saw is not really what you think. This and this and this is what happened. I'm like, dude, like, come on.
Yeah, you watched it.
If that wasn't the cherry on the top to get the memo about the manipulation and the way that they control and censor information, I really don't know what it is. And that's on top of just, being, simply put, a case of a government sanctioned murder of Cuban nationals when their only crime was trying to leave. Granted, back then, trying to leave Cuba was still codified in the criminal code as a crime. It was called salida ilegal del país, like illegal attempt to leave the country. And if I am not mistaken, I think that the jail time was between 4 and 8 years, depending on the circumstances where they could codify that. So yeah, it was a crime to leave the island, to leave the plantation. It's like from that mentality, it's like, who are those obvious slaves? Just who do they think they are that they can leave the plantation just like that? So yeah, it's definitely a very, very sad chapter in the history of the destruction of Cuba in the hands of communism.
Yeah, my father was convicted of a crime for trying to leave Cuba. So it happens a lot. Yeah, it happens quite a lot. There is no leaving, or now there is, but at that time there was not.
Now there is, yeah. But even when I left, it was still, all that changed after I was already here in the United States. Same thing with the possession of foreign currency. At some point when I was still there, possessing foreign currency was still a crime codified in the criminal code in Cuba. Yes. Only when the Russian and the Eastern Europe pipeline got cut off, and they realized that they were up to here with 11 million of Cubans that were going to die of starvation if they didn't do something different. It was that they opened up and they kind of like changed that law. But until I was a young adult there, possessing any foreign currency, it was a crime.
Incredible. Mm-hmm. What were you going to say, Zach?
So regarding the tugboat incident and then the thing that happened afterwards, just to be clear, instead of like sending the men in black to erase your memory with a flashy pen, they just called all the witnesses into like one big meeting and said, by the way, that didn't happen.
Exactly. It's exactly the same. And it's kind of, I'm so glad that you bring that reference, because in I can't believe I have been in this country for 20 years now, but in the 20 years that I have been here, where I have many people approaching me and say, hey, I want to go to Cuba, or if I have the chance to go, what should I do, this and that. And then my question always is, which side of the matrix do you really want to know? And then I always use the movie reference to let them know it's a whole different story. The Cuba that the government is selling you in the tourism flyers, the one that they have been putting out in their PR campaign for the past 62 years, is a whole different ball game from the one that I lived, the one that I grew up, the one that I left until 2001. So tell me, which of the two do you want to know? Do you want to learn? Do you really want to see? And then I'll give you my tips accordingly.
I think that you mentioned once that there's like the Kim Kardashian side of Cuba, the stuff that they want to show you, the pretty pictures, the old cars. And then
there is the Hamlet side of the picture. If you guys don't know, I think his last name is La Bastida. Hamlet is an artist from the San Isidro movement. Recently in Cuba, he has been in Germany. I know it's in Europe. I believe pretty sure it's in Germany for quite a few years. And then he decided to go back to Cuba, and he has been jailed in Villa Marista since his plane landed in the Havana airport. Why? You know why? Which one is his art expression? He did like this huge painted poster of a transcript of an interrogation at Villa Marista when he was a political prisoner. So Villa Marista is, I don't know what would be the equivalent of that. I don't know, the FBI, NSA dungeons where they interrogate people and nobody knows about them like for 6 months. Just imagine something like that, like literally like House of Cards type of interrogation.
Well, ironically, Guantanamo, but the other side of the fence.
Exactly, that too. So that's so.
Wow, that was deep, Zach.
In his case, this guy, that was his performative art, was that he did this huge poster of a transcript of an interrogation of a dissident in the hands of the state security, the political police in Villa Marista. And lo and behold, I don't know, he's been out in Europe for quite a few years. He flew to Havana this week and he has been arrested since then. His girlfriend in Havana doesn't know his whereabouts. All the other like artists from the San Isidro movement, or kind of like this, dissident movement, libertarian groups in Havana, they don't know anything about him. I mean, they may as well go ahead and shoot him and let you know in 3 months where to go and pick up the body. After all, it's not the first time that happened. The regime has a pretty good track record of doing that before. So
they do have a great.
That is true. Just for the record, one of the Cuban LP chapter leaders in Pinar del Rio province, Raul Ramirez, his son, somewhere around 15 or 20 years ago, was murdered by state security.
I have a cousin in Pinar del Rio too that was in political prison as well.
Yeah. I think if you're Cuban, you have either a family member or a cousin or a friend.
At some point, you're gonna have somebody. Yes, at some point. And you know what's really like interesting and kind of like sad and heartbreaking at the same time. Like in my case, for example, I have learned many of those stories after I have been out of Cuba, after I got my mom and my dad out of Cuba. Because all my life there, it was always like this double phase where they teach you how to survive outside, where Big Brother is always watching you, and then your family and your circle of trust is where you really discuss the things that are important. And sometimes you don't share those long-time family stories, especially with children, because we know children don't have filters. They kind of like let it out anywhere, and then they can get the family in trouble. And I was thinking about that the other day, and I'm like, my God, I told my mom, how come you never told me about any of this when we were in Cuba? And she was like, well, knowing your mouth, you would be in trouble a long time ago if I told you anything like that. And I'm like, well, Now I understand, especially after being a mother myself, but it tells you how, repression and censorship and living onto that controlled society, basically what it does is like it promotes the individual to live two lives, two faces. Like you were mentioning before, like the black man, like there is one reality here, or the movie The Matrix, and another one here is like two separate stories. So yes, it is 1984. It's not a utopian novel anymore, guys. It's reality, and it's happening around us for quite a while now.
Let's talk about medicine in Cuba, because I don't know about you, but that's the one thing that I hear the most from people. Michael Moore did a great job of selling Cuban medicine as it's something amazing. It's wonderful. It is the greatest in the world. They have all these technologies that we don't get here in America. And yet I have my family members begging me to please send them the basic necessities, including aspirin. My cousin was just sending me a message saying that she couldn't find yeso, the stuff for casts.
Yeah, for the cast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Band-Aids, Tylenol, alcohol. Yeah, it's like, I'm really going to try to keep it ladylike with Michael Moore, because I have a huge beef with that dude, like big one. So yeah, it is free, quote unquote, but at what cost? Does anybody has really paused for a minute to think? We in Cuba have paid and are still paying the ultimate price for whatever they want to give us for free. And at the end, that free is subpar, is not enough, is ration. And at the end, if you don't have the right connection and the right friendship in the right place, you're simply not going to make it. You are not going to make it. What Michael Moore showed in that documentary was just like outrageous. But again, the expectations of any type of ethics from that guy just flew out the window a long time ago. But what he showed was the clinic and the hospital in Havana where only the tourists that go and pay in dollars, the high elites of the Communist Party, the high elites of the military, and the high elites of the government and the top ranks of the ministries, they are the only ones that have access to those hospitals.
So Caitlin,
my dad almost died of a medical malpractice in a regular average Cuban Joe hospital in Cuba, simply because in a gallbladder surgery, they didn't have a working X-ray machine to do some sort of like imaging that they're supposed to do when you're laying on that bed with your belly open before they close you down. My father's life was safe because he has family living abroad who took him out and took him to hospitals in Germany.
Amazing. So,
and the stories
they happen to everyone. I think what people don't understand is that if you are a Cuban, like everybody has the same problem.
Michael Moore's show is not the reality of the 99% of Cubans on the island. You're
going to love this comment, Marilyn, but there you go. They have an embargo. Okay. That is the reason. We need to address this point because this point is huge for Cubans, please.
That's a favorite question. So my question for Scott would be, do you even know why or how the embargo was put in place to begin with?
Give us a little something, Marilyn.
We're talking libertarians here, right? So the Helms-Burton Act was enacted legally by the U.S. Congress when Castro and his government took away the individual private property of American citizens and American companies, and the Cuban government and Castro never pay the due price that usually happens, that is all when that happens. So when you see it in a point of view, number one, the whole initiation or beginning of the Helms-Burton law and the embargo was actually to protect, newsflash, the individual property rights of American citizens. So are we gonna be libertarians with property rights, or are we not? We gotta take a stand there. That's only two starters. And then number two, after 62 years, with so much like political theater, left and right, and everything in between, there are actually only a few things or restrictions in place from the initial, original, actual embargo. One of them is that the Cuban government cannot be extended credit by American companies or American banks. Yes, you can trade with us, but you got to pay in cash. Guess what? Let me give you another point of view. Marilyn Salabarria, here now, an American citizen, taxpayers, naturalized American citizen. With this background story that I have seen with the administrations in these countries, from Bush to now to whatever, because this seems to go into eternity, with bailouts and government intervening with, disrupting market forces in any shape and form that you can imagine. Just imagine if they lift that and they start giving credit to a country and a government that has the worst rating at the Paris Club as creditor all over the world. Guess who's going to end up picking up the tab for that? Guess who's going to end up signing the check for the next bailout? Newsflash, is going to be us right here in the United States. And even though in that case, when you look at the statistics, and again, all this information is readily available, just ask Mr. Google, it's going to be right there, okay? The United States is the #1 supplier of medical equipment, medicines, agricultural equipment, seeds, and food to Cuba, and Cuba paid in cash. So no, if you want to justify the utter failure of the socialist economy and a centralized and a repressive society, at least with me, you need to bring me a better story, because the embargo is not going to cut it.
So just to clarify, just to reiterate what you just said, Cuba does receive goods from the United States. They have to pay in cash, but they are able to receive agricultural goods. They're able to receive medical goods. They are able to get things. They are also able to buy from other countries.
Exactly, with the rest of the world. Yeah.
With many
The
countries,
only
including
difference
Spain
is
and
that
China and Brazil and etc.
when you think about it, the only difference would be like if you go into Costco, instead of paying with a credit card, you have to pay in cash. Like literally $100 bill on top of the other.
Right. So people
And
assume that the
still-
embargo means that you can't receive things in Cuba, but what it really means is that they have to pay in cash, and there's a limit to what they can receive.
The mental gymnastics with the semantics of the war have been manipulated for so many years, and then sadly, most people all over the world have just became so lazy to actually find out about it. I mean, believe it or not, we are in 2021. Everybody has a mini computer on their hands with access to information from God knows when, and we're not doing that. So that's basically the only difference. And it's still with the so-called embargo, the trade and the commerce with the United States. And guess what? The remittances from these traitors, Cubans, the worms that left and live not only in the United States, but all over the world, are the two #1 revenue streams that are keeping that regime in power money-wise.
And the drug trade.
Well, drug trade and human trafficking, everything kind of like under the umbrella of the tourism. Yeah, those are very profitable business lines for them too. So yeah, again, I don't buy the embargo line at all. No. And the other thing is that it's kind of like funny, because I grew up in Cuba and like literally everything bad that happened was the fault of the embargo and the Yankees. It doesn't matter whether it was a hurricane, like a dengue outbreak, mosquitoes, or whatever, the crop didn't, work well. Dude, you plant a coffee in the plains of Havana when it's super hot in the summer. Somebody should have known that you need to plant those in the mountains where it's cold, and more humid, and that things like that. Everything was the fault of the embargo and the Americans. So like a really quick funny story. When I was in high school, like in 10, 11, 12th grade, we had mandatory military preparation classes. Like literally in your weekly schedule, you have a 45 minutes class that it was military preparation. That's how I became familiar with AK-47, you know, how to shoot, how to do this, how to do that, how to crawl under the fences and that kind of thing. And it was kind of like funny because in my high school, my classroom, we were only girls. And then these military teachers, they were like these retired army guys. They were usually guys. And at that point, I'm talking about what, 91, 92, we were just so fed up with their propaganda. We could not articulate exactly why we knew that was BS, but we all knew it was BS. And I remember the running joke in those classes was like, they were giving us, no, we got to be ready for the invasion, this and that. And then us, all girls, teenagers, we were like, okay, we just want the army to get here. Where are the gringos? Can we just get them all here and just get over with it? Because it was just nonsense, nonstop nonsense.
So you and your friends wanted the Americans to show up and take care of the situation.
Bring them over here. Come on, like we're gonna get married. We're gonna make them happy, and we're just gonna trash this circus once and for all. And then obviously the teacher would be like red, like we were like, okay, we kind of like push it too hard. Maybe he's gonna call the police on us.
Oh boy. So there's another subject that I think we have to talk about with Cuba, besides the medicine, besides the embargo. I think those are the two big issues. What other big issues do you normally get about Cuba? What is the biggest thing that you get besides the medicine and the embargo? Is there something else that you
Oh gosh, there's so many things, Martha, actually, to be honest. Obviously, we always go with those because, again, the regime has been very effective with 62 years of putting out that PR machine about education and medicine, and everything is the fault of the embargo. But there's so many things that I have lived here in the United States, especially in the last 18 months, that literally give me like flashbacks that I am back there. I mean, when we're talking about the way that government centralized controls education, the way that that they manipulate information about medical freedom, about true informed consent, about body autonomy and things like that. And I'm like, I'm back in Cuba where I got this thing in a school and my mom and my dad were not there. And I learned what informed consent in a medical setting was when I came to this country. Not even in Miami. I learned that here in Colorado. So that was past 2004.
So wait, just to explain it to people who don't know. So in Cuba, if you are sick and you go to a doctor, the doctor does not have to tell you what you are suffering from, what ailment you have. They can in fact tell your family, they can tell other people, and they give you the excuse that the reason that they're not telling the patient is because they don't want to upset the patient.
Yes. Which is, again, it's like a very gray area to thread. I really hate to throw labels and generalizations on it because, especially after working as a medical interpreter for so many years in this country, it actually depends on the specific situation of the patient and the family itself. But yeah, that's the way that it is in Cuba. The doctor might come and explain you, but there is no like a paper track of any legal record or anything like that. And that's why medical malpractice goes left and right and goes totally unchecked. Like just this morning, I was checking a video. I think it was on Twitter or Instagram, and I couldn't put it out because it was in Spanish. It was this young man whose mom died in one of these isolation hospitals where they have patients that are positive for COVID. His mom passed away, and they let him know like hours after the fact. And then when he no family, no nothing. I mean, Governor Cuomo rings the bell, but anyway, same situation. And when he got there, he having some medical background, he realized like the oxygen cannula was wrong, that she was in the wrong position, this and that. And then he was making this video calling to Diaz-Canel, like, this debt is on you. Like all your healthcare wonderline is BS, and this is just one example. How many other don't we have that maybe people don't have the smartphone to do the video or to vent about it or to post about it, and that's why we don't hear about them?
But there's another thing that we hear a lot about, and it goes back to the medical issue in Cuba, and that is Cuba sends doctors all around the world. Cuba's so amazing. They send medical doctors
because they're so caring and so nice. And
okay, let's tell people
always
what's
like
really
a hidden agenda behind it. And I mean, I hate to burst anybody's bubble, but it's just another business revenue for them. I mean, what Cuba have been doing, and they started doing this way before I was born. They started this like in the 60s with international missions in Africa. It's just the modern definition of indentured servitude. And then not only are they exploding the labor of whoever they're sending into these missions, they're also using these missions as a propaganda machine to keep kind of like spreading Marxism all over the world. And there are plenty of books and plenty of stories about it for whoever wants to go down that rabbit hole. But just to tell you a cool story, I still have a cousin in Cuba who is a doctor, and she was sent to Bolivia last year. And then the way that works, just to use rough numbers, is that let's say that the Bolivian government pays the Cuban government $3,000 a month for the salary of an OBGYN doctor who specializes in fertility treatment, right?
Which is cheap already.
I know that doctor gets. So the Bolivian government pays the Cuban government, and then the Cuban $3,000. I'm just making up even numbers, right? And then the Cuban government pays that doctor $900. I mean, the Bolivian government doesn't even pay the doctor directly. And that happens everywhere, whether it's a medical mission, whether it's doctors, whether it's construction, that like it happened to my parents when my dad was sent to Libya because Castro had this bright idea of gift Gaddafi a big road in the middle of the desert that could double off as a landing strip for Air Force planes in case of war. So it happens in every single situation where the Cuban government has sent anyone to any other country. That's how we have the messes with the FARC in El Salvador, in Colombia, the guerrillas in Bolivia. All Latin American has always been the system thrown out of balance, politically speaking, by the infiltration and the penetration of these missions that the Cuban government sends. And the same thing has happened in Africa and everywhere else where they go.
That does happen quite a bit. So the point that we're trying to make, those $900 that the doctor would receive, first of all, it's not per month. It is per the entire trip. The doctor's passport is confiscated.
Yes.
Their family stays behind. Marilyn, you were saying that you were sent to Libya with your parents, which was a miracle of miracles. That doesn't happen.
We still don't have a good explanation for it, but for the most part, like for example, in my cousin's case, she was sent to her mission, but her husband and the kids were in Cuba,
right?
And yeah, I use fictional numbers, but it's like for a monthly salary, but you still can see that the Cuban government, through the Ministry of Health, they keep more than 70% of the wages of that doctor. And then that doctor doesn't have an ID, because the minute you land in any other country under a Cuban official government Cuban mission, your passport is being held by whoever are the state security watchdogs in that group. So that means that your movement is restricted. You're mostly living like in quarters, like camps or things like that, where all the Cubans are together. So you don't even have the freedom to say, oh, I'm gonna rent an efficiency in Hialeah. No, it doesn't work like that. All the Cubans are here. This is your place. You stay here, you bow your head, and you don't say anything anywhere they go. So they do restrict your freedom to move in that sense. Many of the Cubans that have deserted, like they say, from those missions, I mean, they have had to make like really adventurous treks without any documents to be able to do that, or they have had to pay off whoever is the state security watchdog in their group. They have to pay them off because, again, money is king, so that person can give them their passport, and that's how they made the trek to escape the mission and to go to another country.
What would you call this if you had to give it a name? What would you call what doctors and others, military in Venezuela? What would you call what the Castro regime does to them?
I don't know. There's so many words, and probably none of them is very appropriate for a public
Invasion. We
forum.
could start with invasion.
Yeah, yeah.
Zach, do you have anything to add with Venezuela? I know this is our other favorite subject, is how Cuba affects Venezuela.
Cuba has become a Venezuelan colony. There are more than 45,000 Cuban regular troops in Venezuela.
Mhm.
The reason why most of us don't see them is because they're not wearing Cuban uniforms. They're wearing Venezuelan uniforms in Venezuela, like they wear Nicaraguan uniforms in Nicaragua. A lot of the troops who go there get trained in the dialects, with, of course, all the discipline of a communist army. So literally, soldiers will be beaten if they don't learn their phrases right. Just like in the Red Army in World War II, any Red Army soldier would be beaten over any ridiculous reason. And also the doctors. It's not just the regulars. The doctors double as spies. They get used to spy on all kinds of people, from activists in any particular neighborhood to doctors being assigned to specific generals in the Venezuelan armed forces. And of course, they're reporting back to state security or whoever it is. There actually is a law on the books in Cuba where all male medical students must complete military training between year 5 and 6 in order to get their university degree. Otherwise, they don't graduate. So right off the bat, a lot of women too, but it's mandatory for men. Every male doctor in Cuba is also a reserve soldier and a spy.
Yep, it is. That's true. I have a nephew that just started the mandatory military draft training now. He's only like, 15, 16, I think, right off high school. And I know that for sure for medical school, because it was like that since I was there. And the same thing happened in Bolivia, like with all these last elections and all the mess that happened when Evo Morales was claiming that the right stole his votes and all that. The poll watchers were Cuban agents. So,
How do we fix the situation in Cuba, guys? So now comes our opinions. How do we fix this? How does Cuba exit the situation? How do we make it better?
That's the million.
Well, my honest
question.
opinion is not appropriate for live television.
Okay.
I think it's the $1 million questions, but the more that I read and the more I try to educate myself about everything that has been happening both inside and outside Cuba for these 62 years, I can tell you for sure that Cuban solution is not going to come from anywhere else. Nobody really cares. It's going to have to come from us, Cubans inside and Cubans outside the island. We are the only ones that can save this mess, because we have to totally forget about everybody else. They don't give a crap. We're just not that relevant. I think and I hope that there's going to be some sort of transition similar to what happened in Eastern Europe when the communists fell down, that at some point, because look at it, they are inheriting the plantation on the island like if it was literally like like their property. One died, and then the brother, and then this guy out of nowhere that nobody knew who he was. And then at some point, my hope is that at some point somebody's going to come with some sort of like idea similar to what Gorbachev did with the perestroika and all that in Russia. And then it's going to be a gradual change. Because the other choice, what would be? The other choice would be an armed conflict. And it's going to be hard, number one, because the first thing that Castro did when he took over in Cuba was to confiscate firearms. So only government officials and criminals have firearms at this point. And number two, because then it will be a bloodbath. And nobody wants that. The problem is that something like this transition is going to take longer. And then, to be realistic, even let's say that even tomorrow something happens and this mama huevo de Díaz-Canel changed something or whatever, right?
I'm so glad that this is an English program and most people probably don't know what that is.
Ask and you shall receive. Yeah, he's a moron and then some, right? Let's say that he decides to do something like that. It's still going to take another 60 years to rebuild that country. Because I mean, the infrastructure, the economics, the money, the financial, that's the easy part. You know which one is going to be the hardest one? The hardest one is going to be to switch the mentality, the brainwashing, centralized, control life programming of 3 generations of Cubans. That's going to take us another 60 years to teach people that they have value as individuals, that they have natural given rights, that no government can give them to them, therefore cannot take them away from them, that there are things as, yes, you have freedom, but then you also have freedom to screw up. And then if you screw up, you're going to have to pay for it. I mean, these concepts are completely new for anybody that has been born and raised in Cuba after, I don't know, 1965.
To be fair, you came to this country 20 years ago, and you are now a small business owner, and you've been able to transition from that mentality. So maybe not 60 years.
Well, yeah, but I have the advantage that I did the transition here in the United States.
That's
that
true.
Again, it might not be perfect by our standards, but that's a whole different ball game. But still, when you put it in perspective, it's better than one we have all over the world. When you put when I'm thinking about another 60 years, I'm thinking about Cubans and people there, people that have never left the plantation, people that don't know that there is like a whole world of opportunities, and yes, messes and mistakes and violations and whatever out there, but they have a right to know that. They have a right to know and see that, and then make decisions and choices on their own.
Well, I think what is the biggest change for them is that they will be able to have the freedom to decide to sell their crops or whatever it is that they do to whomever they want. As it stands right now, Cubans can only sell if they have crops, or if they have an animal that they grew, they can only sell it to the Cuban government. There's no free market in Cuba, which is why prices are low, which is why there's not enough, and it's a whole domino.
There's no private property, even though they have all this new legislation with this Diaz-Canel in the past year or so. This is just like mental gymnastics of switching names and all that for something that is just like leasing from the government. But at the end, you know, as long as you don't have a constitutionally protected right to private property, and as long as the government controls the banking and the finances industry, at the end, it doesn't matter how many loops you do in the process. At the end, you're doing business with the Cuban government. Repeat after me. We have to end the embargo and open Cuba and this and that. Okay, dude, come on, repeat after me. At the end of the loop, you're doing business with the Cuban government, because they are the ones that own everything. So again, yes, you can choose from the outside to do business with whoever you want, but then don't come at me, you know, just throw your hands up in the air and say, I'm going to save Cuba one mojito and one underage prostitute at a time, because that ain't going to happen.
And there you have it.
Well, let me just interject real quick. I think it is absolutely key that the Cubans do it in the style of how the Romanians overthrew Nicolae Ceausescu in 1989. Literally, totally unexpected. He said the wrong thing in a speech. He pissed everybody off, and next thing you know, 100,000 civilians were storming the presidential palace, and then the army, the army took care of things. That said, I think that it's key that they get rid of the existing power structure first and foremost, and then open the floodgates for foreign investment at the same time. Because if they try to do anything with the existing power structure and they just do capitalism with the Communist Party still in power, then what we're going to see is socialism with Chinese characteristics, where, yes, you see the photo of Shanghai in the 80s and you see the photo of Shanghai in the 90s. Markets did absolutely build modern China, but with the Communist Party still in power, they just have better technology to flip one switch. Your passport doesn't work. Your bank account is frozen. And then next thing you know, you disappear, and then some Communist Party official has your kidney a couple months later.
Yep.
That is going to happen in Cuba if they do not annihilate the existing power structure.
Let me tell you, I'm so glad that you mentioned those two things. And it kind of like makes a couple of things click in my mind. Number one, with the whole process of the Soviet Union disintegration, when Gorbachev was in power and all that, it always called my attention that all the information that we receive in Cuba, because I was still in Cuba back then, was about Russia and Gorbachev and the Glasnost and Perestroika and this and that. But then all of the sudden they did like this radio silence on anything that came from Ceausescu and all these countries. And it's exactly because of what you just said. They didn't want the Cubans to kind of like get that little seed or how to, nip this on the bud once and for all. And number two, sadly, the scenario that you are describing with this kind of like socialist and a totalitarian government with a more capitalistic Chinese style economy is already happening. I mean, sadly, that started to happen when I was still in Cuba. I worked in tourism in the hotels, industry, restaurants before I left, and that's exactly what has happened. And then what do you have? Gaesa, which is the front company. I'm struggling with. Like the words are coming in my head in Spanish, and I'm struggling with the. So they're like the front company from the Fuerzas Armadas, the military, the army in Cuba, and they are the ones that control all the resorts, the restaurants, the hotels, everything where hard currency gets transacted in the tourism industry in Cuba. So sadly, that
would be like the Pentagon owning Las Vegas.
Exactly. Just imagine the Pentagon running Las Vegas, all the national parks, the hotels, and the resorts in the United States. It's basically that. And then they gave it like this corporation structure. They have like some partners from other European countries that are being, taking home back and forth with whatever business they're doing. But that's what is happening. So sadly, that's kind of like what is going towards. And that started since they decriminalized the dollar and any other foreign currency in Cuba was still there. That was what, in 95, 94. It was roughly after the rafter crisis when the Clinton administration was still in power. And that's the problem that I see as you do, because if they go that route, which is what they want to do, because obviously those people on those elites, like they live like millionaires in the United States, they're not going to let go of what they have just because you and I say is the right thing to do. They're going to hang on to it to dear life. And then that's what they want, because that's what is going to perpetuate their privileges while the rest of the Cubans live in abject misery. Because they don't care about it.
So I guess moral of the story for all our North American Anglo viewers who are really uncomfortable about some of these topics, nobody here is saying send the 3rd Marine Division to storm the beaches of Havana. What we're saying is if/when the Cubans in Cuba eventually get a hair up there, to just finish things once and for all of y'all, please do not get CIA Tourette's.
As that happens, I want to thank you so much, Marilyn. It's a pleasure having you on. It's a pleasure having a fellow Cuban on and talking about these things because, as you know, we get this a lot about the myths of Cuba. And I think it's important to set the record straight and have people, especially libertarians, know what's actually going on in the island so that when they do get that message that it's the blockade, they know exactly what's going on and why that matters. And we will keep hoping that Cubans will take the lead like Ceausescu and
yeah, we all hope and pray for that. And we know in the past years, we have seen a civic society that's been increasing in resistance. And I'm telling you, they deserve all the kudos and all the support that we can give them, because they're literally having the man parts and girl parts that not many people are having here in our first world societies nowadays. So definitely it's a very, very important thing to recognize. So thank you both for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be able to vent out and talk about these things and kind of like get the message out. So I'm not the only crazy Cuban in the neighborhood.
No, you definitely not. I am there with you. Thank you, everybody, for watching. You have our Twitter handles beneath. Please like and follow this show if you can. And
real quick, thank you to everybody who participated in the phone call campaign for Venezuela. If y'all are interested and you did phase 1, there is a phase 2. Go to VenezuelanEmbassy.org. click on news, and you'll see what you can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.